Welcome back, everyone, to Core in Civics. My name is Brian, and I'm a high school social studies teacher. This channel is meant to provide some simple civics education to anyone who really needs it, right? I think that as adults, we tend to lose some of this or never receive proper civics education. And I think, especially right now, it's more important than ever. So today's topic, as you see, is the Supreme Court. I will eventually probably make videos over really important Supreme Court decisions, like the ones we saw this term overturning Chevron, amongst many other things that, granting presidential immunity in the Trump case. But I thought it was really important to give you a simple overview of what the Supreme Court is and the impact that these 9 individuals that you see on the screen have on each and every single one of us. It's very, very massive, and I think that a lot of people don't pay attention enough to the Supreme Court or don't even know who these 9 individuals are. So we're going to go through each of the 9 as well as how do they generally work. This is an edited format. Actually, I have a presentation, as you can see, 1.4 that I give my students in my law class that I've tweaked, obviously. There's some things that we do that I just can't do on YouTube. But let's just go through really quickly. Now, quick overview. There are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. It has not always been that. It started as 6, fluctuated to 7, 8, 7, up to 9. In the late 1800s, I believe, is when it was finalized to 9 to represent the 9 district courts that were present at that time period. A justice makes it to the Supreme Court by being appointed by the President of the United States and then confirmed by a majority of the Senate. They serve life terms, either until they die or if they retire, which we will see kind of who people replaced here in a second. And then in the past 6 years, 4 justices have been added to the Supreme Court, 3 by former President Trump, and then 1 by current President Biden, which, again, you will see. We'll go one by one through each of them. Now, this is the current makeup of the Supreme Court. The image here is just where they sit on the bench, actually in the judiciary. That's just their positioning. It's by seniority. I've listed them by seniority as well, and that is how we will go through each of the 9. I'm not going to read them all now, because we're going to go through them individually. But these are the 9 people who have a massive, amount of power and control over what this society looks like. So let's start with the most important person, quote unquote, Chief Justice John Roberts. He is the Chief Justice, which means simply that he is kind of the leader of the court. He's the one that calls cases to order. He's the one that generally navigates questioning and creates order within the court. He is not the one that has been there the longest. He has been there since 2005 when George W. Bush appointed him to the court. He's from New York. You're going to notice the hometowns are fairly similar, but I'll make one exception or one note on one of these individuals and the impact that has on their views. He is a conservative, obviously appointed by George W. Bush, a Republican and a conservative in his own right. Makes sense that they're going to appoint justices that look like them. On the court currently, he is seen as the moderate. He's seen as the mediator, even though he is not moderate himself. He is actually quite conservative, but there are people a lot more conservative than he is on this court. The actual most senior, the person that's been there the longest, is Clarence Thomas. By the way, the ages may be slightly off. I haven't tweaked them since, January, February. But he is from Savannah, Georgia. He is one of the 2 very conservative gentlemen on this court, partner with the person that comes up next. He was appointed by George H.W. Bush back in the 90s, so he has been there for over 30 years. Thomas has gotten a lot of flack recently for a lot of political donations, astronomically higher than his colleagues on the court, accepting millions of dollars from wealthy donors and individuals that he then later heard cases from. But Clarence Thomas is the person that served the longest. Fun fact about Clarence Thomas is he did not ask a single question in oral arguments for a decade on this court. From 2006 to 2016, he remained silent. So when cases came to the court and, the judges are allowed to interrogate and ask questions, he did not ask a single one for a decade. There's no real confirmation of why that might be, other than that maybe the best guess to people that have is that a close friend of his, Justice Alito, Antonin Scalia, was on the court during this time period, and they had very similar views. So maybe he just didn't feel it was necessary that Scalia was talkative and would ask all the questions for him. Now, his pal currently is Samuel Alito. This is the second, very ultra-conservative individual on this court. He was appointed also by George W. Bush, similar to John Roberts, and he is the also most far right with Alito on this court. He is the one who writes the Dobbs decision that overturns Roe v. Wade, as I'll show you here in a second, kind of what that court case looked like. But he is very, very conservative. Now, Sonia Sotomayor is the first liberal that we will see on the court today. She was appointed by Barack Obama in his first year in office. She is from the Bronx, and she is one of the one of the four women, rather, on this court that has been there. She's the longest serving woman, I should say, on the court. Now, Justice Elena Kagan. She is slightly younger than Sonia Sotomayor. She was also appointed by Obama the year after Sotomayor was. She is also quite liberal, though maybe not as liberal as Sotomayor. Now, Neil Gorsuch is one of the first ones that is under the age of 60, as you'll see from some of the next ones coming up. He was appointed by Donald Trump. He was the first appointee that Trump got to the Supreme Court back in 2017. And I won't talk much about the hometowns, except for his. Denver, Colorado. So he is the only judge that we have on the bench that is from the western half of the United States. The reason that is important is out west is where most of our Native Americans and indigenous populations live. And Gorsuch is quite conservative in a lot of policies, and a lot of his views and a lot of his rulings are bend pretty far to the right, except in one key area where he's consistently liberal, and that is in Native American rights, indigenous population rights. That he is, very, very pro allowing them to live their own and form their own communities and their own governments, and to protect them from the U.S. government. That is largely attributed to his time out west, growing up in Colorado. He has more education and studies in that matter, and so he is just more knowledgeable. And I think as a result, he is kind of seen as the quote-unquote expert on the bench of those 9 when it comes to indigenous law. Now, the second appointee for Donald Trump is a man named Brett Kavanaugh. If you know him, it's probably because of his Senate confirmation hearing, where there was a lot of controversy over alleged sexual assault that occurred while he was in college. But nonetheless, he was nominated and appointed to the Supreme Court in 2018. He is also conservative, not shockingly, and he's from the D.C. area. And then the third and final nomination that former President Trump got is Amy Coney Barrett. She is the one that replaced Ruth Bader Ginsburg when she passed away. And she was appointed at the very end of Trump's term in office. She is also quite conservative, especially when it comes to reproductive law and bodily autonomy law. And then last but not least, the most recent nominee, in addition to the court, is Ketanji Brown Jackson. She was added in 2022 by President Biden, and she is the third liberal on this court, and joining Kagan and Sotomayor. So you can see the division of the court is like 6-3 in favor of conservatives. They have a supermajority, that is what that is known as, which has allowed them to make a lot of rulings that are more conservative than prior decades of the court. That was more balanced in terms of ideological thinking. Now, how is a case heard? How does it reach the Supreme Court? So petitioners are people that ask the court to review a case. They usually write what's known as a writ of certiorari. And these are cases that have been heard at the lower court, most likely. There are a very small fraction of cases that have original jurisdiction, is what it's called, but essentially the Supreme Court can hear it as the first case that it's ever been held. Those are tend to be very, very high profile things dealing with the federal government. In order for a case to be accepted to the Supreme Court, 4 of the 9 need to say yes, not 5. You don't need a majority, and that allows wiggle room for that. Maybe there's someone in the middle, or like the 4 in the minority can, convince someone to rule in their favor. But it's probably a good rule. It's called the rule of 4 that allows only 4 of the 9 to accept a case. They receive about 7,000 cases per year, petitioned to them, asked to them to review. The Supreme Court is unique in that they get to choose which cases they accept, and they usually only accept about 1% of those cases. This current court, the Roberts Court, especially post-Trump Roberts Court, is extremely selective. So even less than 80 cases. I think last year they heard about 60-ish. I can't remember the exact number. but they are very, very selective with the cases that they choose to hear. And so that means that most cases that are asked to be heard by them are rejected, and that the lower court ruling then presides over. Now, to give you like a brief timeline, I am not going to read all of this, but to kind of give you the overview of how essentially cases reach the Supreme Court and how slow it takes, I'll go through the Dobbs case, which overturned Roe v. Wade. So in March of 2018, Mississippi passes this law that banned abortion at 15 weeks, which was immediately challenged by an abortion clinic, and that was frozen in the courts. December, fast forward all the way over a year to December of 2019, when the 5th District Circuit Court of Appeals again sides with the clinic, and they ruled, just like the district court beneath them, that this law is unconstitutional, therefore it cannot take place. It is then appealed again in June 15, 2020. This now is appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court waits about a year and then it does grant cert, is what it's called, allows them to, says, yes, we're going to hear your case, send us all your information. They set oral arguments for December 1st of 2021. This is where the two sides go in and argue to the Supreme Court why they should rule in their favor, why our position is right. And then they issued the decision in June of 2022. This is when they officially overturned Roe v. Wade and said that states get to choose when and if they allow abortion within their borders. So you can see that in June of 2022 is when the decision was made, and March of 2018 is when the law was passed. So over 4 years from the law passing did it actually reach the Supreme Court and get a decision on it. So the court system is extremely, extremely slow. Now, when the case is actually argued in the court, what does that look like? So once they say, yes, we're going to hear your case, they say, okay, send us your information. What briefs do you have? Make arguments to us, like written documents, and we'll review those before oral arguments. When the oral arguments come up, so that, as I showed you, those are December 1st in this case, then the sides are allotted an equal amount of time. The default is 30, but the judges have the discretion to give them more. I think in this case, they got 60 or 90 minutes on each side to give their spiel and then for questions from the judges. So each side, if the petitioner goes first, so the petitioner is, again, the one asking for review. They argue their side, and then the defense argues their side. The federal government can join in on a side of a case if they would like to, but they are never required to. In the Dobbs case, they did join on the side of the abortion clinics trying to maintain Roe v. Wade and to not overturn it. Now, after this oral argument occurs, this is the mystery behind how cases are decided, I think, for a lot of Americans, because it's not public. This is all happens behind closed doors in private and usually takes several months. So once these arguments are heard and the case is submitted, then the judges in private will begin to come to their own conclusions, their own thoughts. They will usually have conferences, the 9 of them together, and be like, hey, where do you generally stand? They'll get like a informal vote. And then people begin drafting their own opinions. So like Alito and Thomas and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Kagan could all write separate opinions for very different reasons of why they vote the way they do. And then eventually they come to like a consensus. They're like, oh, us 6 are going to vote for this way. You 3 are going to vote this way. You guys form your own opinion and tag each other onto it, and we'll do the same. This can take a long time and several votes, especially if it's a very divisive case. But eventually they have to come to a consensus or at least a final ruling. And so in the Dobbs case, they did come to a ruling. It was 6-3. The 6 conservatives voting to overturn Roe v. Wade, saying that the Mississippi law was good. And then the 3 liberal judges saying that no, it was not. In that case, it was not Ketanji Brown Jackson. It was her predecessor, Stephen Breyer. But nonetheless, that is how they do that. Once they then release the opinions, they make them public. That's when we get the documents. That's when we can read through them and understand why they ruled what they ruled. But that is where you get all these different types of opinions. Now, the different types of opinions, there are 3 really that you'll see commonly. The majority is what matters. The majority is the binding law. This is the ruling of the court. This is what things are now. Concurring is, I agree with the majority, but maybe for a different reason, or I want to build onto this. And so, to give you an example, in the Dobbs case, Justice Thomas did side with the majority, saying that we should overturn Roe v. Wade, but then he wrote a concurring opinion that said we should take it a step further and reevaluate other rights like contraceptives, same-sex marriage, things like that. The dissenting opinion are the people that disagree with the majority. So in this case, it was the three liberals. They say that we disagree that Roe v. Wade should stay intact. It should remain a right that all people in this country have to seek an abortion up to a certain period of time, the point of viability. But the dissenting opinion is more important in terms of like emotional weight, in terms of maybe historical significance, because a lot of dissenting opinions have been later been cited in majorities and been like, hey, they were right 50 years ago, they just didn't win the case. Like they didn't get the majority of judges on their side. So the dissenting, I think, has more of a symbolic meaning. And I think it's less important legally, but not less important when it comes to the writings themselves and justifications. And then very, very rarely, if the court is so divided that you can't get 5 to side on one side, the plurality opinion. So let's say in a case it was like 4-3 to 2. So there's no majority, but there's a plurality. So the 4 would write the plurality opinion, and that would be the same, equal to the majority. So the plurality opinion would be the binding rule of the land that the court has decided. So those are the 4 key opinion types. Now, the last thing I want to talk about are modern controversies surrounding the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, for almost all of its history, has been the most popular of the 3 branches of our federal government. The president has always been really mixed reviews. Congress has been very mixed reviews, except your own congressman. But SCOTUS has always been, yes, they're great. Like they actually do their jobs until the past about 6 or 7 years since the Trump administration. So I'll talk about some of the modern controversies. So the first is that the Supreme Court is not acting as impartial actors, as they should. Right, that they should be interpreting law. They should not be inserting their own opinions into this law. So a lot of people have come to the conclusion that these are just 6 Republicans and 3 Democrats. So they're not technically, right? That's how people think that they're ruling. And that doesn't seem good. It doesn't seem like the law should be flip-flopping based on people's opinions. And so that's a huge controversy surrounding the court right now, is that they're just acting on their own personal biases, not based on what the law actually is. The second is, should we expand the court? So I mentioned how we have been at 9 since I think it was 1869, but it was like the late 1800s. That was to represent the 9 district courts in America. Today we have 13 district courts in the United States. So there have been calls to expand this to 13 justices in the Supreme Court. But obviously there's been calls that say that's just a power grab by whoever's in charge. So if currently Biden did that, he would get 4 nominees to the Supreme Court, which is a lot of power. But others could push back and be like, okay, then let's change the process for how we get a judge to the Supreme Court. So if Biden expands it by 4, then maybe we have like a committee appoint the judge, that have Republicans, Democrats, Independents on this committee that then get to appoint these judges, or just like a neutral, third party like the Bar Association maybe should have a say in who gets to serve on the Supreme Court. But that nonetheless, expanding the court has been rumored for years. It's just never happened. Now, it's interesting to think about, like, is the Supreme Court good or bad right now? I think it's a really, hot-button issue. It's a really hot topic, especially with some of the recent rulings that I will address in future videos. But I want to hear what you have to say. Do you think the Supreme Court and the 9 individuals that have incredible power over you are doing their jobs properly? Do you think that there's other things that we should implement, like an ethics code, or should we implement term limits so that they can't serve until they die or retire? What are your thoughts on the Supreme Court? And any questions that you have for me, I'd also be willing to answer and happy to answer for you as well. So drop a comment if you want. Like, subscribe if you enjoyed this content and you maybe learned something, or found something out that you didn't before. And I'd love to create more videos like this for you in the future.